We will, recording has started now. We will go around our panelists, and I'd really like to begin by hearing what's exciting you about the AI space, particularly in the green sector at the moment, and what one thing would you like people to take away from today's talk? So Melon, can we start with you there?
Yeah, of course. So, so we run a comms agency, and we spend a lot of time working with clients to help them understand the opportunities in the green economy, but also obviously the challenges around climate change. And I'm really excited about AI because it can help speed up some of the less maybe interesting parts of the job, you know, in terms of some of the production, etc. But I think the biggest challenge is more around, you know, the content within it. So in other words, as you said, you know, the output is only as good as what you put in. And ultimately, as marketeers, sustainability consultants or teams, etc., we are still responsible for, you know, what's being put out there, i.e. we can't rely on AI to get the messaging right. You know, it's not there yet. So that is still our responsibility. And I guess that's the key thing, you know, for me in terms of a takeaway from today.
Amazing. Thank you. Anita?
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, so my name's Anita Lloyd and I'm an environmental lawyer. So I'm very interested in all of this from a regulatory and legal framework perspective and how the two things fit together, because obviously the legal frameworks have been around since before AI, so they don't take account of it in many circumstances. You know, we've got developing guidance and we've got some EU legislation coming through at the moment, but, you know, the two things are not necessarily aligned. And I think it's very interesting to see how sort of one can impact the other. And one of the things that I think is very interesting is that AI is being used sort of on both sides of the fence. So we're seeing AI being used by regulators, but also by companies. And I think it can be a very useful tool. But as Malin said, I think we need that, we mustn't overlook the human effect and the human checks and balances.
Incredible. Thank you. And Lucy?
So I am CEO of Connected Impact, which is a company that helps, you know, support companies to communicate better on ESG and sustainability areas. And we use AI as well. So for me, like, AI has been really important in opening up the breadth and depth of information which we can analyse and look at, which is really important, particularly for companies that might be in, you know, multiple locations. They'd be complex, working across multiple different industries. And then also we've got to look at a broad range of different types of communications. So what the company is doing in terms of media, press releases on their website, what's been spoken about in social media. So it's incredibly extensive, and those are things that we couldn't do, you know, without AI being involved in some way at that kind of, you know, breadth of information. My takeaway is probably, you know, around understanding the limitations of AI. You know, we've all heard of the biases involved in AI, and also, you know, when it gets things wrong. So just to ditto what's already been said, really, you know, the human element and input is really important. And I would say that, you know, if you're using AI on a day-to-day basis, it's very important to sort of you know, be aware of what those potential limitations are and potential biases are, so that you can use AI in an ethical manner.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Vimla Rapidou and I'm the CEO of Honey Badger, and we're a change consultancy that works with organisations to build better cultures, including sustainability. Sorry, Lucy, you used an acronym there. Could you just go through what ESG stands for?
Oh yeah, sorry. So that's environmental, social and governance aspects. So it's covering the broad range of different sustainability topics. So from the E, it would be the sort of emissions of a company. We look at biodiversity, impacts on biodiversity and nature. water usage, those sorts of things. Around the other areas of social would be things like diversity and inclusion, training and development, health and safety, and then business ethics and corporate governance.
Amazing, thank you. What's really incredible there is the focus on the human aspect across all three of what you've been saying, and how that is integral to how we roll out AI and use it. And so I think moving on into what that means for us, in the state of marketing report from HubSpot, we started to see that 63% of people say most content will be created at least using AI, using AI's help. And I think that's showing us how it's going to become a tool for us in the future and as things develop, but it's not going to be the be all and end all for the sector. But with that, 82% will believe that it's going to help them produce content more effectively. So we've got this kind of tension between it being a tool to help us do our jobs, but also what does it replace, and how do we continue to sense check it, bring the human back in, understand how it's being used. What other things have you started to see in your work for how AI is being used in terms of your organizations and clients embracing AI, but also the organizations that you work for? Anita, would you like to go first there?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think I'm seeing it in a few different ways, really. I mean, one thing is that it sometimes does highlight the naivety potentially of some firms in relying very heavily on AI. So I think that's when it seems to come back and trip them up from a legal perspective. So we've even, not from a greenwashing example, but we've seen an example in the US whereby actually a lawyer was sanctioned by a court for using AI to generate pleading documents, which apparently seemed to make up some cases it was citing legal cases which were actually made up. And the lawyer put that in front of the court. And of course, the court then realized what was going on. So, we've seen it. So an unhealthy reliance on it, could definitely come back to bite you. And the other thing that I'm seeing, I think I mentioned in the introduction, is that regulators are starting to use it. And I think that's another thing that companies need to be very aware of, which is that, everyone can use this tool. And it's extremely powerful. And I think Lucy's going to talk a bit more about those sorts of aspects. But I think that's definitely the sort of two of the main strands that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Lucy, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think like you say, the regulators and bodies are harnessing AI to do sort of to, I suppose, scout a large volume of company information which they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So it definitely opens up capabilities. I think there's still a lot of difficulties in that, and I don't think there's anyone that's really got that optimized or efficient to be able to use it all the time, or without I think analyst input is always going to be really key. What I would say is that from our side, we see a lot of business leaders, CEOs, senior management teams really embracing AI. And I think the World Economic Forum has recently completed a survey which shows that over 80% of business leaders are already using generative AI or intending to use generative AI this year. But what was really interesting is that only 44% actually felt ready to deploy the technology. So therein lies the issue that everybody wants to embrace AI. They see that there's opportunities to improve efficiencies, to innovate, to promote growth, but there are lots of sort of drawbacks in the sense that it needs to be guided by experts, if you like, and we need to understand the technology that we're using, the strengths and limitations of it. So
yeah. Amazing, thank you. And Malin, I guess specifically around that content creation element, what is it that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think because particularly around sustainability, because they're such complex areas, is really, it's difficult for teams anyway to wrap the heads around all the guidelines and the regulations, but also, every business, there are so many aspects to these things that we're talking about. So I think it's easy to see, a powerful tool like AI as sort of a simple solution to that, because it'll cut through some of that complexity. But in reality, sure, at one point you might get there, but obviously it's not there. And interestingly, I actually asked both ChatGPT and Claude yesterday if they were reliable content creators for this kind of content. And both of them said, so Claude said, simply using me would likely produce non-compliant material. And ChatGPT said that it can help you generate some texts, but ultimately, sales and marketing, legal teams, and sustainability leaders are responsible for the content that you put out there. So they're even answering our own questions, which I thought was quite interesting. And I think, as we said, like I think that the lure is the speed, because we all feel so, we all lead very busy lives, don't we? And there is this opportunity, I guess, to speed some of that up. But it's just realizing that as a content creator, you still have to have that knowledge yourself.
Yeah.
And alongside with that, you don't know what you don't know. So if you haven't got a grasp of the topic and what's important for your organization, you're not going to be able to spot the challenges in whatever they're producing either. So
yeah. And so with that, and actually to build on it, we're seeing AI producing more content, and that in turn is leading to misinformation, because it's not always sense checking what's there or creating truth, and it's honest about that when you ask it. So how is it leading to greenwashing, and what's the relationship between kind of greenwashing and reporting governance structures? Lucy, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. I think I'd say that a lot of that could be related to not understanding the limitations of the technology. I would also say that in terms of avoiding greenwashing and communicating authentically, it requires a knowledge and understanding of the sustainability frameworks and what actually constitutes greenwashing, which there are multiple different definitions and ways in which companies can greenwash, and it's very easy to actually greenwash accidentally, essentially through communications which are not aligned, through not understanding the different EU directives, and the CMA's stance. So yeah, I'd say there's, and I'm sure Anita can speak more to that as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's I think the understanding that the framework is a big part of it, and the nuances of that framework, and how individual any assessment must be of any green claim. And I suppose it could be quite easy to make a claim that sounds very innocuous, but from a legal point of view, the underlying requirement is currently it's based in trading standards legislation. So it's all about things must not be misleading. And then you've got several layers of guidance on top of that, which explain what does that mean. So the CMA guidance, for example, talks about the fact that there must be information sitting behind the phrase. Sorry, I've just momentarily lost you all on my screen. I hope you're still there, because my
We're still here,
but I can't see you. Okay, that's all right. I'll just yeah. So the claims can look quite innocuous, but actually the requirements from a legal standpoint are really quite significant, in terms of something like saying environmentally friendly might sound like, oh, that's fine, that you can say that, but actually the legal requirements to be able to say that are really quite significant, because you have to be able to show how that is beneficial for the environment. So you'll need data, you'll need to make sure that you're not perhaps misrepresenting one part of your business by saying something very positive about something but omitting to talk about something. So it can even be greenwashing by omission. So you know, it's a very complex framework, and there's lots of different factors there. So I think it can be quite easy to get on the wrong side of it, basically.
Yeah, and I think what you touched upon there, you talked about trading standards and obviously the Competition and Markets Authority. I think it's quite interesting because, so we deliver carbon literacy training, and there's quite a lot, quite a big chunk of that talks about greenwashing. And initially, when we start talking about it, I think people feel really like, oh my gosh, they're just so strict and it's just so onerous. And, why does it matter? It feels like it's nitpicky, basically. But ultimately, I think what a lot of people forget in business is that it's actually about having a level playing field, isn't it, for organizations? So it's not just, obviously, there's the environmental side, of course, if we pretend that these things are true, we're not going to be able to tackle the challenges we're facing. But on the other hand, actually, if your competitor is claiming things that are simply not true and then therefore gaining a competitive advantage, ultimately that has a huge business impact. And I think in some way that kind of gets lost in this conversation a little bit, because I think because the topic is, environmental or, equality, or whatever it is, people feel like it's more about that, but actually ultimately part of the reason why they're cracking down on this is simply fairness, trading fairness.
Yeah, and and the proof is there in consumer trends, right? People are more interested in buying products that have those environmental impacts, or are claiming to have those environmental impacts. And I think that's only going to become more of a market in the future. So if you are lying about it or not, or omitting things from it, it does become a bigger problem. And I think in our build up to this, we also spoke about the business benefit back to investors as well, in being able to meet those standards and requirements and governance structures as well. Would anyone like to speak to that part of business return?
Yeah, I think it's, the difficulty is, there's a really big balance between obviously complying with regulations and then, actually, communicating the progress that you're trying to make to become a more sustainable business. And, an impact of the regulation and an increase in sort of green claims being bought is that companies now become quite afraid to actually communicate anything. And we see a lot of green hushing, which is where companies, might set some targets, but don't communicate much more than that in the short term, and don't provide those regular updates, which are really important to sort of go along with the company's journey as to where they are. So, it's really important to keep both things in mind, actually not communicating where you are on your journey and what progress you're making is also a negative in terms of, transparency. So I'd say, we need to embrace, support and help and an understanding how we can meet, compliance and ensure that we are being forthcoming about, the data that's backing any claims we make. But we also need to be open and communicate, where we're at and, the data behind, our impacts and things, which comes through in the disclosures, which are recommended by multiple sustainability frameworks. And we see a lot of the big corporates, obviously, sort of expanding on their communications around those disclosures, and that's starting to trickle down into, a medium and small enterprises as well.
Yeah, we actually see quite a lot of people that are now signing up to do our courses, that pressure is coming from investors and shareholders, because they recognize that, as a business, you're going to, you have a more profitable future if you lean into all this.
Yeah, and I think from a, I've talked about the regulatory framework in terms of how that can trip you up and cause sanctions. But on the other hand, it's actually a relatively clear framework to help people who do want to make claims and who can validly make claims, from having the confidence to do that and to be able to check their claims and know that they can then confidently say something about their product or their service, and that they've actually been able to take that step with confidence.
Yeah, and I think investors will, they want the data points, they want all of the disclosure information on the environmental and social and governance topics, and they'll look for multiple sources of information for that. So, if you're not communicating on these areas, then potentially you will miss investment or lose investment because of this. And this is something that obviously the big corporates are acting upon, but of course, that the SMEs and the medium-sized enterprise are part of the supply chain, and therefore the requirements are being passed on down, down the supply chain, because the corporates are required to report on how the impact of their supply chain, and that's becoming more and more important.
And when it is passed down to those small organizations or further down the supply chain, what are the impacts of that? Because when you're in a large organization with lots of resource and time and money to kind of put into this, what are we seeing as a trickle-on effect into smaller organizations to deliver this kind of work? Whoever would like to speak to it.
I'll go. Yeah, I think it can be. There's a lot of regulation coming around the supply chain due diligence side of things, as well as on green claims. And I think that you're right that a lot of the requirements, perhaps from the financial markets and from these big bits of legislation, they directly impact the very, very large organizations. But then, of course, the way that they serve and satisfy those obligations is by asking for information from further down their supply chain, and not even just asking for information, but potentially placing requirements on those people. So, for example, looking at recycled content as an example, you could have a large organization which is impacted by some of these environmental requirements, and they want to make claims about their product having a certain amount of recycled content, but they've obviously going to be supplied, let's say it's plastic, by different suppliers, and so they're going to be making demands on those people who might actually be located in jurisdictions where they haven't got exactly the same frameworks, and sometimes that can really be a blocker for people to join in those supply chains if they can't produce the relevant kind of certificates or the relevant kind of information. And it can be very difficult for smaller organizations, certainly.
Alan, do you want to feed in on that one?
Yeah, so I think there is also quite a lot of overwhelm in general. There are so many big topics, aren't there? Like if we're in the middle of this kind of huge transition in general as a world. We've got obviously talking here about two of the big ones. On the one hand, we've got and the environmental challenges that we're facing, and then on the other hand, we've got technology that's evolving at quite some speed, and I'm sure they will both have huge implications on how we live going forward. And I guess that's why they're also linked, in that if you feel overwhelmed, you feel under pressure, you're not quite sure what to do, you're looking for then tools obviously to help you on that journey, and AI is, so if you're thinking about it from a sustainability perspective, obviously AI is one of those tools that like we said before, will help speed some of those things up and help us move a bit faster. But as we've said already, it's just making sure that you understand the risks that you're taking around those things and still have the knowledge. They definitely are amazing tools if you do have that, and it does work, but you kind of have to do the groundwork first. And I think one of the things that I find quite interesting then around AI is this sort of how it would describe us as organizations, or I don't know, countries, or whatever it is, groups going forward. I think that's a really interesting fascinating. I guess that's sort of what you're looking at, Lucy, in particular. But I just think that's fascinating, you know, feeding all these things in, and what does it say about us?
Yeah. Did you want to build on that, Lucy?
Yeah, I think, you know, that's an important aspect of, you know, what Connected Impact does. So we use AI techniques to really, you know, access large volumes of information and to do text analysis or content analysis, which enables us to look in sort of granular level detail as to what it is companies are communicating about. So that might be, you know, the topics of ESG and sustainability that the companies are focusing on, and how that aligns with the disclosures. So, you know, if they're talking a lot about their transition plans, you know, are they actually backing that up with sort of data points on how they've reduced their emissions, you know, their plan to net zero, etc. So yeah, I think it's a developing area, and yeah.
Amazing, thank you. So we're seeing on the AI journey, we've kind of got AI for content creation, but then also AI as a transparency tool, which is what you're talking about there. So understanding, I guess, more from a consumer's perspective, whether those claims or discussion points around ESG are actually valid. What's the kind of middle ground, or where do you see the space moving towards as in the future? Madeline, would you like to start with that one?
I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Lucy. If you look like you have a bit of an answer there.
So the middle ground. Can you say it again? The middle ground.
Yeah, maybe not maybe middle ground's the wrong framing, but the way we've started to describe the AI journey is there's AI for content creation, and it's being used as a tool to help speed up, produce content around sustainability, green claims, but it's also then being used as a transparency tool to check those claims. So from a consumer perspective, you're getting the feedback of actually that organization might not be doing what they say they do, or that kind of thing. And then the behavioral aspect, knock-on effect, is organizations just don't say anything. They're too cautious to put their content out there in case it's picked up. So they're being quiet, and it just perpetuates the circle. So rather than the middle ground, like, where do we see things progressing? What's the kind of future in that journey?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, companies are still getting to grips with a lot of things. The sustainability frameworks, especially the CSRD, which is the, you know, the EU sort of directive that's kind of come into play, is incredibly extensive, and the amount of things that it covers, you know, I think part of the difficulty is, you know, sustainability is often managed across many different areas of the business, and therefore, you know, actually just sort of getting your head around, you know, the frameworks and who might be able to pull the relevant data from different places, and then understanding what the risks are, and, you know, the reputational risks that might sort of accompany those. It really takes, you know, a whole business approach. Really, you need input from, you know, multiple different areas. The social side, you need input from HR departments, you need to understand the sort of regulations, which will be a compliance department. You know, a lot of these sort of, you know, management systems in place to be able to understand sort of who has accountability, you know, for the final publication of these data points, etc. You've got all the monitoring that underlies, you know, the data itself, which is important. Actually, we've not mentioned that, but, you know, AI is being used in monitoring tools already. So, you know, it's actually ironic that, you know, it's actually, you know, we can say that it's being used in both ways, like you say, to improve transparency, improve the data that we sort of rely upon to understand our environmental, social, and governance impacts, but also, you know, it is being used as a tool to sort of call people out as well. So, you know, I think that's something that, you know, people are going to be quite accepting of, that AI has lots of different applications. And yeah, I think you know, I think for my advice for people working, you know, in this space is to collaborate with other people within your teams. You know, you don't have to take the responsibility on yourself. You know, it does require input from multiple people across your business.
Can I just check acronym check again? CSRD?
Yeah, so that's the Corporate Sustainability Directive, which is the new EU directive which is coming in, which has multiple different ESRSs, another acronym, which are basically set out a list of disclosure requirements on environment, social and governance, and it is more E dominant. So I think there's 4 documents which relate to environmental issues, which can include like your sort of carbon footprint, but also covers things like circularity and biodiversity as well.
Amazing, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Anita Rawmalin, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this it presents a lot of opportunities. Businesses that are, you know, brave, that, you know, and can see, you know, that how the conversion of all this can, you know, can turn into, and a bit braver maybe, you know, that, you know, not working against it, but, you know, just going with it, recognizing that actually, you know, we're at a place at the moment where things are still developing in every single sense. That's always rich ground for entrepreneurs, isn't it? And you know, opportunists in the business sense. But also, I think that actually, like, you know, like you said, Lucy, then, you know, it's kind of coming from both sides. So yeah, it can help us scrutinize as well. And actually, you know, with the, you know, we've got, apparently this year is the year when Gen Z is going to overtake the boomers in the workplace, I heard. And I'm not saying that every Gen Z is, you know, into all of this, but, you know, there is a real mindset shift coming through as well. And I think that will help, you know, I'd like to be positive about it. It might help push this forward in a way that, you know, we can use both, you know, for positive outcomes rather than, you know, a lot of the doom and gloom that's around both topics. That's not to say that, you know, we don't have to be careful. Of course we do, because fully appreciate that, you know, both could go the wrong way, both AI and we've got an ageism alert in the chat. I'm not quite a boomer, but I'm definitely that end of the scale. So but yes, I think that there is, you know, yeah, like I said, rich ground for innovation. And the other side of it, I guess as well, is, you know, we talked before about how, you know, greenwashing or not talking about it is obviously, it's detrimental for the reason that, you know, we can't scrutinize businesses. But actually the other side of that is that if businesses are more open about where they're at on their journey, that means that other organizations can also learn. You know, actually some of these challenges are actually, we actually need to solve them together. It's more about collaboration. You know, there's no, we don't need lots of businesses solving the same issue over and over and over again in isolation. You know, people need to come together. And, you know, maybe that's another opportunity. I think, you know, completely different way of thinking from, you know, the current commercial environment that we're in.
And just to jump in on that one as well, I think, you know, it's interesting that the main regulator of all of this in the UK, it's not an environmental regulator, it's the Competition and Markets Authority, coming back to what we talked about before, that this is about how businesses, you know, operate as regards each other and as regards that marketplace. But it's interesting that the Competition and Markets Authority have also issued some guidance about the ability to collaborate on sustainability initiatives, which is almost a bit of an you know, there are some exceptions to the normal rules. So it's basically saying a recognition that companies can't necessarily do this on their own, and that there can be more progress sometimes when companies are working together. But obviously companies are nervous about working together because of the competition law background. So you know, I think that's just a really good signaler from the CMA to say, recognizing that this is an area where collaboration is very important.
Yeah, That's incredible. And I think it goes right back to what we were saying at the beginning, that AI is a tool, but it's only a tool that's good when there are people involved in it. So it's quite nice to go back to that of, we need to move forward with a culture of collaboration. That means people being at the center of how we use it. And I think the other point to that is, it's great to report on environment and sustainability and carbon offsetting and the data, but it's also important to remember that it's people that are the receivers of that work or that impact. And I think that's the point we've not really touched on, is what does this actually tell us about those organizations, and what does that mean for the receiving end of it, the people?
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of work that's been done with the consolidation of the sustainability frameworks is really to help with that, to internationalize the sort of applicability of the frameworks, so that we have one set of, you know, data reported in a consistent way, which then it can be compared. We can compare the impacts of one company to another if we look at similar sort of characteristics and things, and that's obviously incredibly important for investment. You know, we need to be able to make investment decisions. You need to know sort of what the impact of the business is and whether it aligns with your own investment policies and procedures. And so it's really important that companies do communicate that information and are open and transparent. Because otherwise, you know, there is a risk actually with not being forthcoming about, you know, your impacts. Yeah.
Anita or Lucy? Manon, sorry.
Yeah, I'll just I suppose building on what Lucy just said, the integration of these sort of reporting frameworks to include both environmental and social aspects, I think is bringing those same themes around greenwashing to social claims as well. So I think we are starting to see, you know, some scrutiny of that in the same way as, you know, companies making loud noises about perhaps their equality and diversity initiatives, you know, I think will increasingly start to come under the microscope in the same way as those claims about, you know, carbon neutrality and environmentally friendly and eco products have done. So I think it's broadening, I think, and that's about a broader sense, I think, of stakeholder and investor engagement in the E and the S and the G of the way that companies are operating.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe one of the benefits of all this as well is that, you know, you're bringing, you know, when we talk about these issues, we always say that, you know, you shouldn't be sat, you know, like equality, you know, diversity and inclusion shouldn't just sit with HR, and sustainability isn't just a responsibility of a sustainability department. You know, though these things are business wide, and the actual fact that you know, what all these conversations are, or these changes are leading to, is that they have to be company wide, because you can't, no one business and no one sort of department can solve it. It has to sit across it, and obviously that's where the comms piece comes in as well. You as a department, whatever you want to call it, you know, as a function, you know, we can't just produce things on behalf of the business. We need to collaborate with all of these people to make sure that, you know, what's going out there actually you know, genuinely aligns with where the business is at, etc., because there is more scrutiny than it has been previously. Yeah. So, you know, that would mean that you're having to be more true to what you're about, and because the tools are there to scrutinize, you also have to be more consistent across the board, or you're going to be caught out, you know, by the AI that's keeping an eye on you.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, or even if it's just somebody using AI to search themselves, you know.
Yeah, but I think it can sound scary when you say the AI that's keeping an eye on you, but it's actually, from a consumer perspective, for me, really exciting, because it means that there's something holding organizations accountable to the change that we want to see in the world. And that's such a positive, like, use of AI and tools and creating transparency. I'm really conscious of time and want to make sure that there's enough time and space for questions. So please feel free to put questions in the chat or use the raise hand function as well on Zoom, if there are any questions. But I also have one, so I can kick things off while we're waiting for people to process all of that amazing content. And it's actually, I think, probably more for you, Anita. So when we were speaking there around greenwashing claims and I guess the legal implications of reporting, there was the gender pay gap bot that was out on Twitter. So at International Women's Day, a bot would run through organisations that are celebrating International Women's Day and cross-reference the gender pay gap statistics to say, it's amazing you're running that event, but you've still got a gender pay gap of X%, and calling them out quite openly. Do you know if that is precedent for making a legal case against those organisations? Because I think that's like the simplest version of this.
Yeah, I think it could be. It could certainly form the basis of it. I mean, one of the interesting things we've seen in legal circles recently, although not directly connected to AI, but just the thing that stuck into my mind then was we've all seen in the post office scandal that what reliance on data can do when you forget about the human factor. So I think whilst data that's gleaned by robots can be certainly used, I think if anyone's thinking about it in the post office era, there should certainly be checks and balances on the validity and the accuracy of that data. But it's definitely, it's being used. I mean, the Advertising Standards Agency is openly using AI tools to scan the marketplace and has used that as the basis then of action it's taken against companies. So we've seen that with a raft of airlines, and the Advertising Standards Agency went out across the internet with its net and found a number of claims made by these airlines, and they were all, I mean, ultimately the Advertising Standards Agency doesn't have the sort of legal sanctioning powers that, say, the Competition and Markets Authority does, but they were able to, you know, they get a lot of adverse publicity through these things, and ultimately their adverts were then banned because they were making claims that the agency didn't think were valid and were potentially misleading. So yes, I think it's definitely something that can form parts of the basis for legal claims. Absolutely.
Amazing, thank you. The questions are starting to flow through now, so I'm going to move on to those. So we've got a question from Penny, which is, we've heard about EU regulations in this discussion, but what's the UK equivalent?
Oh, I think that's me again. Yeah, so we have got at the moment in the UK, the actual legal framework is not a green claims legal framework. It's actually consumer protection from unfair trading and also business protection from unfair trading legislation, which has been around for a while. But then, and that gives rise to the fundamental requirement that claims made by businesses about their products, services are not misleading. And then on top of that, we've got guidance from the Competition and Markets Authority, the Green Claims Code, very comprehensive, actually very accessible. It's not written in real kind of dense legal language. It's got lots of good little case studies and examples in it, and a really good checklist. So I would definitely commend that to people. It is a really good source. And the Advertising Standards Agency has got very similar guidance, and we've now got the Financial Conduct Authority that's issued its own guidance for companies that are regulated by it. So it's really the case in the UK that we don't have a specific green claims bit of legislation like they now have in the EU, or that's coming through. But the government has talked about it. I suspect that they will see how it evolves. So we're starting to see the Competition and Markets Authority taking more formal action against some companies. So we've had some undertakings agreed with fashion retailers recently, and that's the first time we've seen them sort of following through from their investigations to sort of concrete legal enforcement outcomes. And I think if that seems to be working, then I suspect that the government in the UK won't necessarily go for specific legislation, but I think it's a bit of a wait and see.
Yeah.
Just
And
add,
also,
they are bringing in the UK sustainability disclosure standards, which I suppose is sort of, you know, covers some of the standards which are also in the CSRD. If I'm right, I think that covers the IFRS S1 and S2, which includes the general requirements, which are more about, you know, general good practice around how you communicate on sustainability related issues. And then they have the IFRS 2, which is your climate related information, which is more aligned with the TCFD. So if you cover the IFRS S1 and 2, you are compliant with the TCFD, which is obviously mandatory in the UK. I know that's loads of acronyms.
I was going to say, I might ask you to put the acronyms in the chat if that's okay, Lucy.
One thing you can't avoid acronyms in this space, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that was a lot. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind maybe just giving an overview of what they are in the chat, that I think that'd be really helpful for people. We've got a question from Catherine Malin. I think this one's going to be for you. Are we seeing large corporates investing in carbon literacy training programs as part of the ESG strategy?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like I said before, I think the pressure is coming from multiple sources. So for some people, it's coming from investors or shareholders in general. And for some companies, it's also you know, coming from the workforce. Like we said, you know, this shift in attitude. But also there's a huge issue around the supply chain. So we're seeing businesses, basically, like we talked about before, you know, SMEs, so the smaller organizations coming under pressure by the large corporates. So for instance, Sodexo went out a couple of months ago to say that, you know, they're going to start cutting businesses out of their supply chain unless they can demonstrate not only that they have you know, the plans in place, but they're actually delivering on them. So they, you know, they need to demonstrate that, yeah, you've set your net zero target, but actually how you're performing against that. And we need to see that, you know, see progress on that consistently over time. I just think that's really interesting. So it's coming from lots of different, and obviously then buyers and consumers, of course, alongside it. But I think those in particular are interesting because I think, again, puts you back in the business box rather than just thinking about it as, you know, saving the planet, because that's so much of this conversation, isn't it? But actually, you know, is lives and livelihoods, really.
Yeah, and I think that's the key bit for me personally. Yeah. Stephanie's got a follow-on question from that, which is, are smaller companies also investing in carbon literacy, or are there any other training best practice options out there for those smaller organizations?
We see all sizes, from consultants to large corporations. You know, we roll it out internally for teams, you know, for entire businesses, or, you know, have open courses for individuals. So it's across the board, really.
Yeah.
And then obviously there's loads of self-learning options as well, depending on you know, what you're looking for. And you know, as part of our course, we point people to those as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, is particularly when we spoke earlier on in the conversation, like it's not just the large listed organizations that are being held to accountable, it's across the supply chain, so it does impact and affect everyone. I personally, again, I think there's something interesting around the relationship there between size of organization and responsibility. So because of the pressure of those big organizations, I think it's easy to push that responsibility down the supply chain, but it should sit with them as the big players in the market. But that's a comment.
Yeah.
Not...
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, you know, one of the things we talk about a lot on the training is, you know, whose responsibility is it? You know, you could so easily point your finger in all sorts of directions. You know, it's the regulators, you know, it's the big business, you know, it's the big countries, it's not the smaller country. Do you know what I mean? Like, you could forever point to somewhere else, but ultimately we all have a role to play and we all have to take responsibility of our bit.
Yeah.
That's how we solve it.
And collaborating.
Yeah.
There's a question here from Kirsty around, does anyone have a sense of what AI products are out there for marketers, consumers, and other users specifically around green claims?
I don't know any particularly around green claims yet. And in fact, I did put that question to ChatGPT and Claude yesterday as well, and they didn't know of any yet.
Okay.
But I know one tool, so obviously use those, we use those two. There is also a tool called Perplexity. I don't know if anybody's heard of that in use, but it's basically a way of doing research, and you get references, etc. with it. But same thing applies. You've got to know your stuff to be able to scrutinize it, but it's a good way of shortcutting some research or structure at least. And then, I mean, obviously there are millions of tools. The other one, which I haven't used, is Midjourney. I hear a lot about that in terms of imagery, etc.
I mean, we use AI for, not looking at green claims per se, although that's something that we would capture in our sort of analyses. So we look at a broad range of different things, environmental sort of claims and targets and whether they're aligned. We look across social and governance aspects as well. So we pick up on sort of potential greenwashing risks, and in our recent transparency analysis, that's essentially what we've looked at is, the transparency of 200 companies of FTSE 100 and the top 100 companies in the US. And we've looked at how transparently they communicate on all of these different topics. So that will be released in June time, and worth a read for if it's somebody, if people are interested in that kind of topic area. It definitely give you some more insights as to what the areas of, where people are being more transparent and where there perhaps are a lot of issues with transparency.
Yeah. We've just shown, sorry, Lucy, I hope that didn't cut you off, but we've just shown the results of the poll as well. So some interesting stats there around how many people are not using AI just yet, and who's exploring the capabilities, but also the stance. And I think it's really interesting that people are open-minded to its impact and how it can be used. And I think that's what we want to leave with, is the opportunity really now is we're at this, like as you said, Malin, we're at this transition point of the technology's there, the infrastructure's getting there. So how can we use AI ethically and sustainably to help hold these businesses accountable? Because it could be a superpower, but only if people are empowered to use it in ways that work. So really bringing it right back to where we started, of this only works if there's human input and there's human elements to it. And that's both from the people using AI to help them do their jobs, but all the way through to the person who is at the receiving end of the impact. So carbon offsetting is great, but I want to know what that means for a small shareholder farmer in the middle of wherever. I want to know what that impact is.
I'd say that carbon offsetting isn't great as well. Just put it out there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I should have chosen a better example than that. So with 3 minutes left, could I please ask the panel for your final thoughts? What takeaway do you want people to leave with? What insight do you want people to leave this conversation with as they go on about their day jobs? We'll go Malin, Anita, and Lucy, please.
Yeah, so as I said right at the beginning, that it's the same thing, but whether you're talking about AI or whether you're talking about greenwashing, ultimately we are responsible. Everybody has a responsibility, and it's so easy to push that away to somebody else or someone else. And I think that's the most important bit, to still feel like, we own it basically, and it's up to us to do what we need it to do for us.
Thank you.
And I think, that's emphasized from a legal perspective, which is that, the person who's ultimately responsible for, the information being put out by a company is that company. So, it's not in any way a defense to say that it was generated by AI. That doesn't get you off the hook in any way. So I think that, use the tools, use the guidance, use the checklists, be proud and be confident to make good claims about the good work that your business is doing, but do it carefully and mindfully, and make sure that you follow the guidance. And then you shouldn't have any of these challenges. And if the AI bots are out there looking for your information, they should be able to then work out that it's good information.
My takeaway would be sort of work collaboratively. I think there's a lot of people that know, could potentially help on your sort of in a communications role on how you communicate on sustainability. I think embrace other people within your team, look for help externally when you need it, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And then in terms of like interpreting data, I think, we need expert interpreters, humans in the loop, if we're going to embark on using AI, and we need to be aware of some of the risks and limitations as well.
Amazing, thank you. And I think to follow on from all of that, my takeaway from this is data is an amazing storyteller, and it can help us say where we are on this journey. And that open and honest transparency about where we are on this journey can help us move to a better future that is accountable to creating more sustainability and being environmentally friendly. And that is time. So thank you everyone for attending, and a huge thank you to our panel today. Malin, Anita and Lucy, it's been incredible to share this time with you, and it's been really insightful. Thank you everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.